We should be good. There's a world of difference between what I was seeing on my OBS and before and what I'm seeing now. Awesome. Don't know why that happened. It's just OBS decided to not pick up my mic even though it was plugged in a perfectly natural way. Restarting then. I'm Brittany. This is hualian, and now that you can hear me, welcome to Gaywatch, where we watch gay things and occasionally have sound issues. We're reading Volume 7 of Heaven Official's Blessing. Previously on Heaven Official's Blessing, we discovered the full scope of certain type of shackles, real purpose, use, capacity, what have you, and we lost Yin Yu in the process. So it was fun times. Fun times on the last session. For this session, we read about 2 hours and we go for about 40 to 50 pages, kind of depending on how much I need to, breathe in between things or freak out about things. But that's usually about where we land. So, what else? I have an asthmatic cough. Sometimes it's annoying, and I do my best to aim it away from the microphone so you guys don't get your ears blown out. But bearing with me is pretty much how that goes. Also, for whatever reasons passing understanding, I have taken my allergy meds. I have used the nasal spray that works wonders. I have done everything that I can. And yet, breathing through my nose at this point in time, not great. I might sound a little nasally to you right now. Aside from having some tissues nearby, that's about all I can do. So if it sounds a little bit weird or a little bit off, that's my apologies. I threw everything at it, and this is the best of all possible worlds. It's very strange. Am I coming down with a cold? That would suck. Let's not speak that into existence. Let's not manifest that. Where exactly? We had started chapter 115? 115? We'd started chapter 115, called Breaking the Standstill, a well-timed gift. We were on either page 166 or 167, but this is one of those times where I really don't remember at all. So if somebody knows, because you guys are actually really good about that, top of 166, right, yeah. See, and then you really gotta wonder about my brain, because how you forget about Hua Chang going like, this time seeing you is as hard as ascending to the heavens, like, fuck off. Our boyfriend's back. He's here. Hua Chang has arrived. He was only going to stay away for so long. And that, and I know, he's going because, the boyfriend always makes things okay. It's just that now things are particularly, not okay. So I'm wondering exactly what Hua Chang's going to bust out. Alright. I am just full, especially now we're getting into the second half of Volume 7, so now we're really zeroing in on, like, finale stuff, and I'm deeply nervous about this. But we're gonna just go as per usual and see what the fuck happens. Because of, sinus things today, we may have a midstream break like we did on Monday, so that I can have a constant stream of very hot tea. But we may not. It depends. We'll see when we get there. Okay. I can't even breathe deeply through the nose anymore. All right. The moment Shilian had received the Rainmaster's gift at the Palace of Divine Might, he did notice something unusual. However, it wasn't the gift itself that caught his attention, it was the person delivering it. When Shilian took the package, the person had grasped his hand and squeezed it. That sort of gesture was generally frivolous. It would have been intentionally flirtatious if done to a lady. At the time, Shilian had only blinked and tried to remain expressionless, then gazed at the person across from him without alarm. The one standing there was a tall young man. Although he was dressed the part of a farmer, with patched muddy clothes and a scarf wrapped around his head, his features were fine and handsome, and his eyes twinkled with light, because he can't ever not be hot about it. He physically can't. That's like his one weakness. If you figured out a way to make everything rely, to make like your dastardly plan to bring Hua Chong down, if you somehow made it rely on Hua Chong having to be ugly, you would fail. You would simply fail. Every single time. However, that light only twinkled in the instant their eyes met. When Shilian blinked again, the young man had returned to his shy, guileless disposition, and stepped back with a bowed head. If Hua Chong had sought him out at the Palace of Shanlei, he must have taken care of all monitoring eyes in the area. The moment Shilian saw him, he knew that he was incomparably dependable. There was nothing left to worry about. I'm still kind of worried, but of course I am. Before Hua Chong could even walk over, Shilian had pounced. It was a powerful hug indeed, but Hua Chong wasn't pushed back by the force at all. He didn't even wobble. He only placed his hands on Shilian's back, chuckling lightly without saying a word. Shilian felt thoroughly cheered, but then he remembered something. "Wait, Sanlang," he quickly said. Junwu is quite wary of you. You should be guarding the human array at the royal capital. He must have sent eyes down to watch you. Won't he notice that you vanished suddenly? And is it really all right for the Windmaster to guard the array by himself?" "Relax, Guga," Hua Chong replied. "It's already been taken care of. I won't be exposed for the moment." Shilian assumed he must have blocked the eyes Junwu sent or left a clone behind, so he didn't press for more information on how things were taken care of. "It seems Guga really missed me," Hua Chong remarked leisurely. Shilian remembered the nonsense they had exchanged through spiritual communication while Junwu listened in, then noticed how tightly he was clinging to Hua Chong. He immediately loosened his grip and straightened up before replying in a schooled voice. Yes. You said we needed to enlist someone's help, so that someone was Lord Rainmaster." Hua Chong smiled at him cheerfully. "Correct. The Rainmaster has resided in the lower realms for years, and just happened to be alerted by the opening of Mount Tonglu. It's perfectly logical that she would return to the heavens to check on things. The Rainmaster would have noticed something amiss if Junwu refused her entrance without good reason, so of course he had to let her in. Guga, don't worry, it's fine. You keep clinging on to me like that. I don't mind." It's the bullshit he says. God damn. Shilian softly cleared his throat. "No, it's all right, thank you. But why can't he do anything to the Rainmaster?" "Guga might not know this. The Rainmaster presides over agriculture. This godly role might seem dreary and unimpressive on the surface, so most aren't interested. But it's actually a unique position. Right now, Yushi Huang is the only heavenly official who presides over agriculture." Shilian mused upon this information, piecing together the full picture. "People put food above all else," Hua Chong continued. "If the Rainmaster was killed and an appropriate heavenly official couldn't be found to replace her, agriculture would stop working smoothly, and the world would be thrown into chaos. And people stop worshipping if they can't fill their stomachs. Their anger would be with the Rainmaster first, but they also might become dissatisfied with the great god above her head. So the fire could burn all the way to Junwu if he isn't careful. If he doesn't control the situation properly, it might cause the kind of riots that topple gods." Well, I have an idea. That meant riots to desecrate his temples and topple his divine statues, just as the people of Shanlei once did. On top of that, the Rainmaster doesn't build temples or shrines. hasn't resided in the heavenly capital for years and has no desire to be promoted, Huachang added. So there isn't really anything he can use to threaten or coerce her. It would be hard for him to find a proper reason to officially banish her either, so it's difficult for him to make any kind of move against her, and his position will remain stable as long as the Rainmaster continues to manage agriculture, so he would prefer to keep up the pretense for as long as he can, deceive her for now, then decide what to do later if the truth comes out. I see. Thank goodness, Shilian said, relieved. This was almost a disaster. The Lord Rainmaster really has come to our aid in a time of need. Hopefully her acting skills are extraordinary. Oh, and by the way, we must go find the state preceptor. I have too many questions that only he can answer. With that, they stopped their dallying and hurried out of the palace of Shanlei. The moment Shilian crossed the threshold, he was startled to see a row of guards at the entrance. He readied himself to whip them unconscious with Royer, but then noticed that they were all as wooden as dolls. Their posture was stiff and their expressions unchanging. They had all been petrified by Huachang. Along the way, the shimmering silver light from Huachang's vambraces transformed into silver butterflies, which gradually went transparent and hid all around them as they went. Hundreds upon thousands of wraith butterflies were dispersed throughout the heavenly capital. The pair perfectly evaded every patrolling guard along the way by dodging up or down or abruptly hiding and emerging when the coast was clear. Huachang stood next to Shilian as they watched a troop of patrolling guards stomp by their hiding spot in an alley. After this stretch, we'll take the path above. Shilian nodded and leapt onto the roof, following Huachang's lead. They leapt across the rooftops one after the other, leaving no traces in their wake. A short while later, Shilian dropped onto the corner of a roof and abruptly stopped. He looked back at Huachang, pensive. Seeing him go still, Huachang stopped as well. What is it? Did you notice something? Shilian creased his brow and shook his head. He said thoughtfully, No, but it feels like this scene has played out somewhere before. Before he could finish, Huachang abruptly hugged him around the waist. The next moment, the two fell from the rooftop. The world spun, going topsy-turvy. Shilian's bamboo hat slipped from his back, and he swiftly snatched it before it could fall to the ground. Meanwhile, Huachang held him in his embrace as the two hung upside down from the eaves of some palace's roof. Above them, something crawled rapidly past. Shilian was no stranger to that sound. It was the fetus spirit crawling around. Who knew what it was doing? Perhaps it was on patrol? Just then, another voice came from the streets below. Caw-caw? Caw-caw? Jianlan! Oh, no, Shilian cried in his head. The fetus spirit was still right above them on the roof. They would be discovered if Jianlan walked over and saw them from below. Shilian couldn't be sure what Jianlan's reaction would be, if she would remain silent out of gratitude to Huachang for saving her life, or if she would yell to alert the enemy. Her light, flustered steps got closer and closer until they were just about to turn the corner. Thankfully, the fetus spirit finally jumped down the other side of the roof. The two quickly flipped over and hopped on top of the building. Shilian let out a breath of relief. When Jianlan peeked around the corner of the wall and saw that her son had jumped down to the ground, she let out her own breath of relief and went over. Oh, I'm sorry. I temporarily reverted. C's or TS's. It can still be weird for my mouth to do this, so it's so. Close enough. So, stop running around. This is a strange and unfamiliar place, and it's kind of scary. If you ran off and disappeared, Mom wouldn't even know where to go find you. Why did you come here? Her eyes had landed... pardon me, where's my throat going? Her eyes had landed on the palace's establishment plaque, and she backed away a few steps at the sight. When Shilian saw her reaction, he determined that the golden palace beneath their feet must be the palace of Nanyang, which meant that Feng Xin was currently locked inside. Jianlan must have also known that, and her face twitched lightly. A moment later, she looked down to scold the fetus spirit. Why did you come here? The fetus spirit was hugging something white and lumpy. It sounded like it was gnawing on it. What is that? Jianlan then yelled. What random thing are you eating? Spit it out. Taking a closer look, Shilian discovered that it was a giant, hefty white radish, and he didn't know whether to laugh or cry. There was no need for Jianlen to say that, as the fetus spirit obviously didn't like the taste. It spat the radish out with force, then started shrieking like it was throwing a tantrum. Jianlen hurried over to cradle it, coaxing, Okay. So is a good boy. If it doesn't taste good, just don't eat it. Only poor bastards and silly gods like to eat those things. We don't eat them. No one but a birth mother could cradle such a horrifyingly deformed creature in her arms and still comfort it in a gentle voice. The fetus spirit wiggled its chubby white body and cooed happily. Unexpectedly, pity sprouted in Shilian as he watched this scene play out. However, he was also puzzled. Why is there such a large radish in the heavenly capital? Huacheng quirked his brows. Gaga, did you forget? That's one of the souvenirs the Rainmaster brought you. The gifts grown from the earth. So that was the present the Rainmaster had given him. Shilian tried to imagine Junwoo's face when he opened that wooden box to discover it contained a huge white radish, but his attempt was a failure. It was impossible to picture. Once Junwoo had finished inspecting the gift and determined it was nothing suspicious, he must have tossed the radish off to feed the fetus spirit. It was like he was feeding a dog. After the fetus spirit spat out the giant white radish, it had kicked it away in disgust, but it seemed thoughtful after hearing Jianlen's words, then suddenly leapt out of its mother's embrace. It bounded over, grabbed the radish in its mouth, and then charged into the palace. If Shilian didn't look closely, it really did resemble a smooth-skinned, hairless white dog. Jianlen called after it, Don't go in there, that's... The soldiers guarding the palace of Nanyang didn't even blink, much less stop it from going inside. They had probably been told that the fetus spirit was Junwoo's pet or hunting dog. Jianlen had no choice but to follow it. The fetus spirit seemed to harbor a deep animosity toward Feng Xin, and Shilian was worried that it would hurt him. He turned his head. Sanlong? A transparent butterfly rested on the tip of Huacheng's finger. A wraith butterfly is already hidden on her person. Shilian nodded, and the two monitored the situation inside the palace of Nanyang. Jianlen was bent low to the ground, sneaking around the palace as if she didn't want anyone to discover her. Hesitantly, she whispered, So. However, it was impossible not to be discovered. The fetus spirit bounced into the main hall and found a man seated in meditation. As the man blinked his eyes open, his gaze met Jianlen's, and they both startled. After the initial shock, Feng Xin was delighted. Jianlen, he exclaimed, rising to his feet. Why have you come? Are you all right? You're here just in time. Help me. Just then, the fetus spirit started howling. It jumped between the two, then spat the giant white radish onto the ground and sent it flying with a forceful kick. The giant gnawed white radish smacked Feng Xin squarely in the face with an enormous thud. After punting the produce, the fetus spirit seemed quite proud of itself, babbling loudly and cackling evilly. It seemed to be waiting for its mother's praise. Feng Xin was almost knocked unconscious by the attack, and he wiped away the line of blood streaming from his nose as he yelled in complete outrage, What are you doing? Stay still, will you? Feng Xin was fierce, but the fetus spirit was fiercer, and it screeched at him with a slithering tongue. Ready to grab for it, Feng Xin took a sharp step forward, but the attempt only got his arm bitten by its gaping mouth. No matter how hard he tossed his arm, he couldn't get rid of it. This familiar scene was both horrifying and hilarious, and Feng Xin's fury grew when he was unable to fling it off despite his best efforts. What the fuck? What the actual fuck? Are you looking for a beating? What the hell? Jianlen snapped out of it and cried out, Stop! What right do you have to yell at him or beat him? Feng Xin was startled to be called out like that, and his spirit diminished by half. It recognized a crook as its father. Why is it on Junwoo's side? How did it turn out like this? Jianlen clicked her tongue. How, you ask? Wasn't it thanks to you? Feeding without teaching is the father's failing. Ooh, that's a saying. That has a footnote. Feeding without teaching is the father's failing. From the 5th verse of the 3-character classic, a text for young children that explained Confucian morals while teaching reading and vocabulary. This line stresses a father's duty to teach their children, not just provide for them. I can get behind that. As someone who had a father who provided, but didn't do anything else. If you hadn't been slacking off on your duty as his father, would your own son have been dug out of his mother's womb and made into something like this? What the hell? This is the hell you gave life to. Feng Shin backed up a step at each one of her condemnations, and the volume of his voice diminished greatly. But I didn't know about any of that. And at the time, you told me to get lost. Ha! Shilian, Qian, Lan, whoo! Jianlan, Shilian. You see how exclaimed, I told you to get lost to help you. You came to this bitch's bedside every day with that godforsaken gloominess. You think I didn't know what you were thinking? You had to serve your crown prince and collect enough money to help buy my freedom at the same time. You were battered and bruised, tired and annoyed. Since you didn't have the heart to up and leave, I decided to send you off. I broke my own heart because you were too polite to do it. That's a Taylor Swift lyric. I was very tired back then, Feng Shin cried, but I was never annoyed with you. I wanted to help you. Jianlan jabbed at his chest. Please! You wanted to help? Deep down, you knew damn well whether you could actually afford this bitch's price tag with your meager abilities. You wished you could split every penny in half and spend it twice. Every day you hit the streets to busk and still had to pay your respects to your crown prince and your old emperor. You're lucky that I didn't throw myself at you to add to your burden, expecting you to buy my freedom. What a dream! Shit. Okay. That's not what you said at the beginning. We even made a promise. I always keep my word. Jianlan cut him off. There are plenty of promises and oaths out there, but think for a moment. What have you actually given me, huh? Other than that golden belt. Oh wait, it was only that golden belt, and you even exhorted me over and over to never sell it. Her jabbing had Feng Shin backing up step after step, his expression stiff and ashamed. The more Jianlan spoke, the angrier she became. Or did you mean that godforsaken protection charm? I must have been completely blind to believe that shitty charm could protect anyone. There was barely any good luck, but there sure was a fuck ton of bad. You had less and less money, and your temper certainly got worse and worse. What was I to do if I didn't let you go, huh? Keep tormenting you to death? Torment you to the point where you'd be annoyed with me, complain about me, hate me, and never want to see me ever again? It wasn't just Feng Shin. Even Shilian didn't know what to say anymore as he listened in from above the palace of Nanyang. So that was how it was. Shilian recalled many things from long ago. Feng Shin's early morning departures and late night returns. That's what I was putting together. I was like, oh, Feng Shin had a whole bunch of other shit going on during that time. Late night returns, his exhaustion, his strange, sudden highs and lows, and that awkward attempt he'd made to borrow money from him. All those insignificant yet unusual gestures now had an explanation. Feng Shin was Shilian's servant and good friend, but not his slave. He could have built his own home, had his own family, and he had even found the person he wanted to do that with. But it just had to happen during the toughest days of Shilian's first banishment. At the time, Shilian himself was struggling to survive, so how could he possibly have noticed those details? He was suffering, but Feng Shin was also suffering. Everyone was suffering. And in the end, they finally couldn't keep it going. Perhaps Jianlan had long foreseen such an ending. But Feng Shin still did his utmost to try and support Shilian, even during that time. He had even given Jianlan the protection charms that no one cared for anymore, telling her that they could grant good luck, which was why she had carefully tucked one away in the little robes that her unborn child would one day wear. Of course, that protection charm ultimately proved useless in bringing them any good fortune whatsoever. Looking as if she had said some things she shouldn't have, Jianlan quickly scooped the fetus spirit from the ground, then turned to leave. Jianlan, Feng Shin called out. He was clearly at a loss, lamenting as he pulled at his hair. Come back, I'm still... He sighed. I still feel that I want to take care of both of you. I should take care of both of you. I have a duty, I promised. Jianlan turned and stared at him squarely for a moment, tightening her hug on the fetus spirit in her arms, and then she let out a humph. No need. I know you scorn your son. He's nothing but some hellish creature in your eyes. It's fine. I don't mind. Feng Shin finally came to his senses and countered. I don't scorn it. Then why are you always so mean to him? Jianlan questioned. Can you really accept him as your son? As long as it can return to the path of righteousness, how can I not? Feng Shin replied. Jianlan sneered. Then let me ask you again. You're a heavenly official. Do you dare recognize him as your son? Feng Xin was taken aback. This reaction was natural. The fetus spirit clung to its mother's arms, baring its teeth at him. It looked like an ugly, poisonous insect larva or the deformed spawn of a vicious beast. Anything except human. What heavenly official would dare admit to such an affair or recognize such a hellish creature as their son? It would be an enormous stain on his reputation, and his worshippers and merits would be affected greatly. That's where we end the chapter? That's the sentence we end the chapter on? We better be picking this back up the second I turn the page. This is some fucking drama. We are now on page 116. Page 116. Chapter 116. Page 179. Called The Path Shan't Go Astray, but the mandates are all the same. That's worrying. Let us continue. Feng Xin was only shocked into silence for a few moments before he had an answer, but Jianlan sneered before he could voice it. Forget it. You don't need to say anything. You're someone else's prisoner right now. Even if you dared to claim your son, it would be nothing but an empty promise. I won't believe a word you say, so don't bother saying anything. Even if you're willing to take him as your son, I might not be willing to have you as his father. The fetus spirit was curled in her arms, wagging its tongue at Feng Xin and snickering in a voice that sounded like a grown man's. Jianlan gave it a forceful slap on the behind to scold it. Why are you pulling faces? I told you not to run off. You're driving me crazy. The fetus spirit's ugly little face scrunched up, and it finally behaved. The mother and child hurried out of the palace of Nanyang, while Feng Xin called out from behind, Jianlan, Jianlan! No response. In the end, he was again left alone within the palace of Nanyang. Feng Xin slumped back. Supporting his head with his hand, he glared for a long moment at the giant white radish that had been left behind, covered in rows of crooked bite marks. Then he lay flat on the ground. He wasn't even left with the energy to curse. Above the palace of Nanyang, Shilian sighed. Gaga, do you remember that night on Mount Yujun? Huacheng suddenly asked. The fetus spirit appeared there as well. Shilian knew he was purposely changing the subject, but the business with the fetus spirit appearing on Mount Yujun was also highly suspicious, so he forced himself to focus on it. I remember. While I was writing in the marriage sedan, it used a nursery rhyme to give me hints on how to find the ghost bride, Xuanji. It didn't let anyone else hear. It was a song for me specifically. I wonder why. It was probably acting on Junwu's direction, Huacheng said. Then the rhyme spelled out Junwu's objective, Shilian said. As for why it's become a fierce spirit under Junwu's command, I'm afraid these are all questions for the state preceptor. Then let's go ask him, Huacheng said. I've got good news for Gaga. The wraith butterflies have already found where the state preceptor is being held. Shilian's spirits lifted. Where? There's a scene break. Page 180. The Palace of Ling Wen. The palace was no longer bustling inside and out with countless civil gods rushing around with scrolls stacked high as mountains. Instead, it was now patrolled by the rigid, expressionless Divine Might Guard. Shilian and Huacheng dropped soundlessly onto the corner of one of the roofs. The state preceptor is locked up here. Is Ling Wen watching him? Shilian said. Correct, Huacheng replied. With the brocade immortal on her, Ling Wen is currently considered both a civil god and a martial god. After observing intently for a moment, Shilian commented, Then this is going to be tricky. Although the brocade immortal was no match for them, it still possessed a high level of cultivation and had keener senses than the guards patrolling the Grand Avenue of the heavenly capital. If Shilian and Huacheng were reckless while infiltrating the palace of Ling Wen, the brocade immortal might detect them even if it couldn't defeat them. And once it had discovered them, Ling Wen would surely be alerted. Ling Wen and Junwu must be able to communicate with each other spiritually. If she discovers us, he will too, Shilian said. She's a civil god without the brocade immortal and wouldn't be able to detect us, and the brocade immortal is a mere robe when it's not being worn, so it won't be able to alert Junwu either. We have to think of a way to separate them. We don't need to think of a specific plan. She'll have to take it off sooner or later, Huacheng said. No explanations required. Shilian understood. The brocade immortal was an evil object. Its evil chi was thick and heavy. Since Ling Wen hadn't been formally banished, she was still considered a heavenly official, and it would be bad for her health to continue to wear it. Wearing it also required her to maintain her male form, which drained her spiritual power. Not many people could handle that level of exhaustion, and so there had to be a time every day where she took it off to rest. They were whispering plans to each other when a black-clad man strolled out of the palace of Ling Wen with one hand tucked behind his back. After he gave some instructions to the soldiers on guard outside, he stepped into a side chamber, then exited the chamber a few moments later and entered the main hall anew. That man was Ling Wen, in male form when he entered the side chamber and in her true form upon exit. Her black outer robe had disappeared, and her steps weren't as light and energetic as they had been when she was in male form, a sign of skill in martial arts. She had in fact removed the robe. The brocade immortal was now in that side chamber. The two exchanged a look. "Now they're separated," Hua Cheng said. "Gaga, you've got pretty good luck." Xi Lian puffed a breath and gave him a look. "It's San Lang's luck that's pretty good." Hua Cheng grinned. "Main hall? Side chamber?" After some thought, Xi Lian decided, let's go with the side chamber. Who knows what the situation is like inside the palace of Ling Wen's main hall. If the state preceptor is being kept right next to Ling Wen, we won't be able to get around her. But maybe we can force a negotiation if we get our hands on the brocade immortal. Thus, the two waited for a short while and took advantage of a changing of the guard to hop off the roof and sneak into the side chamber. The moment they leapt inside, Xi Lian wiped away his cold sweat. Sneaking into a lady official's private chambers wasn't something to be proud of, no matter the circumstances. However, his nervous expression faded a bit when he saw the state of the side chamber. Xi Lian's old rooms were more sumptuous than his, Feng Xin's more disorderly, and Mu Qing's more tasteful and exquisite. In any case, this didn't look like a lady official's private chamber at all, so Xi Lian didn't feel as stressed. The chamber was sparsely furnished, so it could hardly hide anything. It wasn't long before Xi Lian fumbled out a chest, but his face darkened the moment he opened it. It wasn't only because he'd gotten a face full of evil qi, but also because the chest was packed full of identical black robes. This again. It was the same as last time, when they had to try and find the real brocade immortal among hundreds of different articles of clothing. It had been a circus looking for the thing, practically a nightmare. This time there weren't as many sets, only around a dozen, but each robe was black and almost identical to the rest. It was hard to tell which situation was more demoralizing. Was the brocade immortal even here? Feeling his head throb, Xi Lian asked miserably, "Sanlang, what's Junwu doing right now? Do we have enough time?" Hua Cheng had been closely monitoring the movement of everyone in the capital. At Xi Lian's question, he replied languidly, "Gaga, relax. We got plenty of time. Junwu hasn't noticed you're gone. He's currently at the Palace of Divine Might and has brought Mu Qing in to interrogate. By the looks of it, it'll be a while." Xi Lian was stunned by the news. "Mu Qing? He's interrogating Mu Qing? Why?" "Wraith butterflies can't enter the Palace of Divine Might, so I can't hear clearly. But you know," Hua Cheng said, staring at Xi Lian, "it must not be anything good." Xi Lian remembered how Junwu had treated Yin Yu and anxiety gripped him, but worrying wouldn't help anything, so he said resolutely, "Let's hurry then. Let me try on each of the robes. Sanlang, come give me orders." If it doesn't become that, I will be ashamed of the fandom if there is not a ton of fanfiction about that. Or more specifically, where that could go in certain situations. Certain versions of the scene we're about to read. If the brocade immortal didn't want to be discovered or didn't want to take the life of whoever was wearing it, it could be worn casually. However, if someone made another person wear it and gave them orders, that person had to obey. They would be able to expose the real thing using that method, but it was slightly dangerous. "Let me do it," Hua Cheng said. Xi Lian shook his head. "Sanlang, you've worn the brocade immortal before, but it doesn't really work on you for some reason. Maybe it's ineffective against ghost kings? Or tops? Only I can do this." He removed his white outer robe and dropped it on the ground by his feet. Hua Chong raised an eyebrow and picked out a black robe to hand to him. Then I will take you up on your offer. Shi Lian swiftly put on the robe. Thank goodness. Ling Wen's black robes weren't at all sensual or revealing in the chest area. They were all very conservative and proper, so putting them on wasn't embarrassing. Shi Lian looked up. Okay, you can give me an order now. Hua Chung's right hand held his left elbow, and his left hand propped up his chin. He looked at Shi Lian, seeming to think very seriously for a moment. Then, Gaga, my order is... Hua Chong smiled happily. The anticipated command came mere moments later. Borrow spiritual power from me. I don't know why I didn't see that coming. I saw something coming. But for some reason it wasn't that specifically, and it really should have been. That's embarrassing. Of course, Shi Lian understood what he meant by borrow spiritual power, and his head almost started smoking. He quickly took off the robe. It's not this one! Ah, what a shame. It's not that one, Hua Chong lamented. Shi Lian schooled his expression. Sen Lang Yu, this isn't right. Be more serious, please. Don't give orders like those. Am I not being serious enough? Then what kind of orders do you mean? Hua Chong asked with humility. Can Gaga be more specific? Shi Lian gave 2 soft coughs. Either way, you can't make me borrow spiritual power from you, he replied severely. Anything else is fine, like turn around in a circle, jump twice, or something like that, whatever you want. Hua Chong cocked an eyebrow. Everything else is fine, is it? Very well. I understand. He handed Shi Lian another robe. Shi Lian swiftly put it on and looked up at Hua Chong once more. Hua Chong watched him for a moment. Gaga. A moment later, he broke into a wide smile. Don't borrow spiritual power from me. He'd been careless. How could Hua Chong do this? Shi Lian hastily began to strip. Okay, it's not this one either. Hua Chong stopped him. Wait, Gaga. Who says it's not this one? You haven't proven it yet. Don't borrow spiritual power from me had been Hua Chong's order, and Shi Lian had to disobey it to prove the robe he was wearing right now wasn't the brocade immortal, which meant he had to do the opposite thing, borrow spiritual powers from Hua Chong. They had gone around in a circle and returned to the starting point. Shi Lian was shaken as he stared at Hua Chong's serious expression. You're too sly, you can't do that. Hua Chong hugged his arms. Why not? Gaga, didn't you say it yourself? Anything else is fine, just don't ask me to borrow spiritual power. Since you didn't like that command, I ordered you to do the opposite. The complete opposite. How can you say I'm sly? Wasn't I just staying true to your words? I'd already be climbing this man like a tree, so I really appreciate Shi Lian's discipline. At a loss for what to say or how to dispute his logic, Shi Lian raised his finger to point at him for a moment. I can't win with you. Stop playing around. Without any further delay, he rushed over and gave Hua Chong a peck on the lips. Even though Shi Lian knew there was no one around, he still looked around after he'd done the deed, as if afraid someone might be peeping. Hua Chong's face didn't twitch in the slightest. Very good, he said calmly. It's clearly not this one either. We've verified as much. Shi Lian removed the second black robe. Don't give that order again either, all right? Hua Chong passed a third one to him and smiled. Fine. As Gaga wishes. Shi Lian took the robe from him, woefully thinking, it feels like Sandlung is getting harder and harder to deal with. That's one way to... Is it just my imagination? No! I think he is indeed getting... Yeah. Although he was still worried Hua Cheng might give more prank orders, Hua Cheng did stop teasing him after those two jokes, but now it seems strange that he was being so serious. Shi Lian tried on each of the dozen robes inside the chest, but he didn't obey any of Hua Cheng's orders. Could the real Brocade Immortal not be here? That was impossible. Ling Wen had to have taken it off, and besides, the entire chest was tainted with its evil qi. It had to be in there. Hua Cheng leaned against the door bar. Gaga, it seems the Brocade Immortal isn't just ineffective against me. It doesn't work on you, either. What could the problem be? If it was... Well, no, but there might be something in there about if you ask them to do something that they genuinely want to do, like, I don't know, trade spiritual energy, then it doesn't seem to work. Or it can be I don't know. The answer is probably gay. That was the end of the chapter, by the way. We're on page 187 for chapter 117 called Hard to Put On, Harder to Take Off. I'm sure that means something really awful, but we're just going to sit here for a second. Shi Lian pulled out all the black robes and started blindly picking at them in a random attempt to find the Brocade Immortal, but he found no success. He could only put his cast-off white cultivator robe back on and turn to Hua Cheng. This really isn't working. Looks like we'll have to take the entire chest with us. Hearing this, Hua Cheng let out a chuckle. Shi Lian was a little woeful, feeling rather ridiculous. It was so silly to drag dozens of robes around as blackmail material. But with things as they were, he didn't have any better ideas. Just as he was stuffing all the randomly strewn black robes back into the chest so they could carry the whole thing out, the doors to the side chamber opened unexpectedly. Ling Wen walked in with hands clasped behind her back, looking exhausted. She had probably finished resting and returned to put the Brocade Immortal back on, but she had run into two uninvited guests who had broken into her chamber, one looking incredibly innocent, the other looking nonchalant. With no comment on the situation before her, she immediately pressed two fingers against her temple. She was going to inform Junwu. However, Hua Cheng moved faster than she did. With one sweeping look, the two doors to the side chamber slammed shut. Ling Wen lowered her hand, her face dropping as well. Hua Chengju was quite impressive. Sen Lung, you've created a ward? Shi Lian asked. A small one, Hua Cheng said. In only this side chamber. Junwu could establish a ward that spanned the heavenly capital, isolating everyone within from the outside world, and Hua Cheng could create a smaller ward within that one, a ward that sealed the spiritual powers of those within and prevented them from accessing spiritual communication. The side chamber had become a chest within a chest. Such wards would need to remain small, lest Junwu notice. It was his domain, in the end. Shi Lian nodded. Ling Wen, I'm sure you can see that the Brocade Immortal is currently in our hands. If you don't want it to be burned to ash by ghost fire, please don't make any reckless moves. Yet unexpectedly, Ling Wen only laughed. But Your Highness, Ling Wen said, the Brocade Immortal isn't actually in your hands. Okay. To be honest, Shi Lian had suspected as much. Nonetheless, he still voiced the most logical deduction. Ling Wen, you weren't wearing it when you left this room earlier. I don't think the Brocade Immortal is anywhere but here. Your Highness, have you perhaps misunderstood? Ling Wen replied. I only said that it's not inside the chest in your hands. I didn't say it wasn't inside this chamber. Now there's a level of pedanticness that we probably should have been prepared for. Her words made Shi Lian think of another possibility, and he cocked his head. Hua Cheng must have had the same thought as they both moved their gazes to the white robe that Shi Lian was currently wearing. You guessed right, Ling Wen said. Your Highness is wearing it right now. How the fuck is that possible? When Shi Lian was trying on the black robes earlier, he had casually thrown aside the white robe he was wearing. All the robes had gotten lumped together when he was inspecting them afterward. Somehow the Brocade Immortal had secretly taken on the appearance of his white cultivator robes, and Shi Lian had picked it up and put it on. sentient evil fashion. Or at the very least, quasi-sentient. Shilian looked down at his clothes and wondered, then where's my original robe? With a casual motion of Hua Chung's hand, the chest of robes toppled over on its own and spilled its contents onto the floor. Buried deep beneath the dozens of black robes was one white robe crushed at the very bottom, the real white robe Shilian had been wearing before. This must have been the work of a malicious spell cast by the Brocade Immortal. While he was trying on clothes at random, it seized the chance to drag Shilian's outer robe into the chest, then slipped out and transformed to look like that robe and replace it. It then let itself be picked up and worn by Shilian. Shilian wasn't surprised in the least, but he was rather baffled. Isn't that a little too cunning? It was only an article of clothing, after all. Besides, wasn't the Brocade Immortal itself supposed to not be very clever? Assumedly Ling Wen had taught it this trick. Sure enough, Ling Wen said, I gave it the idea, though I didn't actually think it'd see use. But that means I was technically the one who made your highness wear the Brocade Immortal. Oh, fuck! Well, here we go. If Hua Chung had handed the robe to Shilian and he put it on, then Hua Chung would be considered the one in control. However, the Brocade Immortal had used Ling Wen's idea to trick Shilian into wearing it, and so the one in control now was Ling Wen. That meant Shilian would obey Ling Wen's word and heed her every order. Ling Wen, Shilian tried, has it ever occurred to you that the Brocade Immortal might not work on me? Ling Wen smiled. I won't know until I've tried. Your Highness, from now on you cannot attack me. If you hear me, nod your head. Although he didn't intend to do so, as soon as he heard the order, Shilian involuntarily nodded before he even knew what was happening. Why was it working now? It clearly didn't work earlier when Hua Chung was the one giving orders. Was it only ineffective when the one in control was Hua Chung? If that was true, then the tables had suddenly turned. Shilian didn't move, nor did Hua Chung. They exchanged looks, but both remaining calm and steady. Ling Wen was calm and steady as well. Now then, will Hua Chungju please remove the ward from this outside chamber? Don't do it, Senlong, Shilian said urgently. Are you sure, Your Highness? Ling Wen said. I can order you to do anything. Hua Chung remained unflustered. It's fine if I can't touch Ling Wen, Shilian thought. No one else is under such restrictions. We'll be in the clear as long as Senlong catches her by surprise and stops her from giving any orders. However, Ling Wen was sharp and guessed their plans. Hua Chungju, I suggest you don't waste your time thinking of ways to catch me by surprise and subdue me. Your Highness, listen well. You will attack Hua Chungju if he attempts to inflict any sort of harm on me. With that, she blocked any plans they could have possibly used before they could even try. Now, Hua Chungju, time to remove the ward, Ling Wen said. I still have work to do. The palace of Ling Wen has an enormous backlog of reports I need to manage that haven't been gone through yet. Can we solve this little problem quickly? Hua Chung only smirked. The next moment, Ling Wen's eyes widened. She seemed as if she wanted to speak, but no voice came out. If someone were standing behind her, they would discover that a wraith butterfly with fluttering silver wings had perched on the back of her neck. It was this tiny little creature that had stopped her body from moving and prevented her from making a sound. Hua Chung hugged his arms and flashed his incredibly fake and insincere smile before saying lazily, Did you really think I'd need to catch someone by surprise to subdue them? Once again, he insists on being hot about it. Ling Wen couldn't speak, but the words she wanted to say were clearly written on her expression. Hua Chungju, have you forgotten? I've already given His Highness an order. The next moment, the Brocade Immortal activated its powers. Shilian abruptly turned around and lunged at Hua Chung, hand raised to strike. Some time passed before Shilian's vision cleared and he came to his senses with a start. Senlong? Hua Chung was standing before him. At the center of his chest, there was a crushing hand upon his red robe. It was Shilian's own. Hua Chung didn't dodge the blow at all. He had stood there and allowed Shi Lian to deliver a full force strike to his heart. Shi Lian hadn't yet processed this, hadn't yet reacted when Hua Cheng firmly gripped his wrist. "There," he said in a low voice. "The attack is complete, and the command released." Sure enough, once Shi Lian's attack landed, he felt his body slacken and his freedom return. For the sake of releasing Shi Lian from the command Ling Wen had given, Hua Cheng had really just stood there and taken the blow without even trying to dodge. Once released, Shi Lian quickly withdrew his hand, his face dropping. It was a moment before he asked, "Senlong, are you hurt?" He examined Hua Cheng's face closely. He couldn't see any physical changes, but Hua Cheng wasn't a living human, and his skin was already a snowy pale shade, as if he'd gone years without seeing sunlight. However, judging by his tone, it didn't sound like he was affected at all. "Gaga is indeed incredible. What a beautiful blow," he complimented with a smile. But Shi Lian continued to look upset, almost as though Hua Cheng had scared him. "I wasn't joking around," he said sternly. "I used almost 3/4 of my full strength in that attack. Are you really all right?" When Ling Wen gave her order, the word she had used was attack. Typically, Shi Lian never used attacking as his intent when he exchanged blows with others. His moves were usually pure self-defense or to restrain a target. He wasn't sure what would happen if he unleashed a strike with attack as the driving force. "I wasn't joking. Gaga really is incredible," Hua Cheng replied slowly. "Perhaps not even Junwu would be your match if you weren't wearing those things." Shi Lian unthinkingly touched his neck, but he immediately dropped his hand when he felt the cursed shackle. Hua Cheng added, "Gaga, I have a question for you." "What is it?" "You had a chance to remove those cursed shackles that bind you. Why did you keep them?" Shi Lian hadn't expected him to ask that. "Maybe it was to remind myself of some things," he then quickly said. "Senlong, don't change the subject. What kind of bad habits have you developed? This situation just now, you could have just restrained me. Why did you stand there and take the blow?" "So do you know that it's a bad habit?" "So you do know that it's a bad habit, Gaga," Hua Cheng replied. "You have no right to lecture me when it comes to taking beatings, you know." Oh. Oh my. Oh my. We just sprint. Okay. Whew. "Oh, really?" Shi Lian said, but he felt guilty the moment the words left his mouth. After all, he'd almost swallowed a sword back when he fought the fetus spirit in the water, and Hua Cheng had caught him red-handed. Among other horrifying instances in Shi Lian's life. "Yes, really. Why use other methods if I can solve the problem by taking a beating? That's your bad influence on me," Hua Cheng replied. Shi Lian waved him off. "Never mind, Senlong. Let's not talk about this anymore. Let's look at these robes." He tugged at the white robe's hem, feeling deeply frustrated. This was just great. They had definitely found the brocade immortal, but now they had to think of a way to take it off. That's the end of the chapter. Short chapters this go around. This is another short one. I'm thinking about when we take a break, because I do need more tea. Let's go ahead and take the break now that we're at a nice, especially, this is chapter 118, Centuries of Pain, Millennia of Suffering. I need tea for this. So, okay, real quick, we're going to take a very short break. It's literally the amount of time that it takes for my electric kettle to make tea boil, which is not long. I will be right back, and then we'll get into this wonderfully named chapter that doesn't give me any anxiety whatsoever. I will be right back. And here we are again. Let me get my face out of the way so that I'm not staring at it while I read, because that's weird. And then I picked up my tea like I'm going to read it. Wow. I don't think that's how that works. Let us continue into centuries of pain and millennia of suffering. Sounds good. Sounds good. There was definitely no way the robe could be burned now that it was being worn, lest Shilian be burned along with it. I'll just keep wearing it for now, Shilian suggested. It's not like it can suck my blood, and Ling Wen shouldn't be able to give any more commands either. A puff of blue mist blew by, and when it cleared, a blue... Here we are again. Here we are again. Okay. But we all know what doll I'm talking about. We all know what doll. We all know what doll. If I could find my place again, we all know what doll. A blue doll stood where Ling Wen had once been. Ah, it wore a very serious expression, and it even seemed to be holding scrolls in its arms. Shilian picked it up and tucked it away in his robes, and then the two crept out of the side chamber and into the main hall. It wasn't just his imagination. The main hall of the Palace of Ling Wen really looked more somber than before. The mountains of report scrolls stacked from floor to ceiling now seemed perilous, like they were going to collapse at any moment and crush anyone below dead. They didn't run into any guards as they sprinted straight for a set of vermilion doors at the heart of the palace. Before they even got close, Shilian heard a trembling, shocked voice. How is this possible? How could this be? It was the state preceptor. Could someone have gotten to him before they did? Shilian kicked the door down with a growl. Let him go! Sure enough, the state preceptor wasn't alone inside the chamber. Everyone turned their head to look at the intruder who had kicked down the door. The shock on the state preceptor's face hadn't faded. Your Highness? The state preceptor didn't look up at him for more than a moment before he lowered his head again. Just wait a second. How can this be? What kind of luck is this? Shilian and Hua Cheng were both speechless. The state preceptor and 3 other people had formed a full table inside the chamber and were in the middle of a heated round of cards, fully drunk on the game. Although previously stated to be 3 other people, his opponents weren't actually alive. They were very crudely made paper dolls. Who knew what kind of bizarre spell had been cast that allowed them to move and even play cards? But as for the state preceptor, his cries had only been laments about the hand he'd been dealt. The entirety of the heaven... Junwoo is... And he's playing... Okay. This doesn't look great. Not like it was looking good before, but you know what I mean. Whew. Shilian had expected the state preceptor to be a haggard sight to behold, that he might be suffering interrogation and torture. He hadn't expected the state preceptor to still be playing cards at a time like this. The whole scene instead filled him with bittersweet nostalgia, and he didn't know whether to laugh or cry. I can't try my tea right now because it would burn the shit out of my mouth. So I am spiritually and metaphorically and in all ways except physically taking a sip. How could he not be nostalgic? During his days at the Royal Holy Temple, whenever he and Feng Xin went to look for the state preceptor, 7 times out of 10 he would be playing cards. Over 800 years had passed, but it was like no time at all, as he once again watched the state preceptor play cards. Even the crazed passion on his face was exactly the same. The state preceptor stared unblinkingly at the cards in his hand and spoke without looking back. Your Highness, you've finally come. Let me finish this round first. Shilian knew this was an old habit rearing its head. The state preceptor recognized no one in the midst of a game. After seeing the figure he cut at the Palace of Divine Might, this version of him was unbearably different. Shilian went over and tried to drag him away from the table. Master, what do you think is happening now? Stop playing. The state preceptor's eyes were red as he yelled, "No, don't! Let me finish! I'm almost done! Just this round! Let me finish this hand! It's almost done! I might win this time!" "You won't win! You definitely won't win!" Somebody has a gambling problem. Thankfully, the round did end fairly quickly. Although the state preceptor had sworn he was going to win, unsurprisingly, he did not. He withdrew the 3 paper dolls with a wave of his hand and finally regained his normal, calm demeanor. As he sat with poise, he said solemnly, "Your Highness, I knew you would come. I've been waiting for you." It certainly... I was so incensed that I read the sentence wrong. "It certainly didn't look like you were waiting for me," Shilian thought. But of course he didn't say so out loud. Respect for one's elders had to be maintained after all. I don't know. That remains to be seen with this one. "I'm sure you have many questions," the state preceptor continued. Huacheng leaned against the door frame. He almost looked like he was relaxing, but he was probably standing guard. Shilian sat properly before the state preceptor, matching his poise. "Yes." After a pause, Shilian asked, "First, I want to confirm, is he really White No-Face? And also the Crown Prince of Wuyang?" "There's no need for doubt," the state preceptor replied. "He is." "I have no relation whatsoever with the Crown Prince of Wuyang, correct? Are we two completely separate people?" Shilian asked. "The only connection you share with the Crown Prince of Wuyang is that he destroyed your home kingdom of Shenlei." "But, Master, you once told me that you didn't know what White No-Face was, and that you were certain he was born because of me," Shilian said in a low voice. "Your Highness, at the time I genuinely did not know what that thing was," the state preceptor replied. "And by the time I found out, it was already too late. However, I was not incorrect in saying he was born because of you." "What exactly does that mean?" Shilian asked. "And the question remains, why did he want to destroy Shenlei?" The state preceptor looked him in the eye. "Because of that phrase you said." Shilian was taken aback. "A phrase, I said? What phrase?" "Body in the abyss, heart in paradise." Shilian was speechless for a moment. Then he asked incredulously, "That's it?" "That's it," the state preceptor said. "That one phrase?" Shilian questioned. "What was wrong with it?" "Everything," the state preceptor replied in a low voice. "Everything started with that line of yours." Shilian could sense that he'd have a hard time swallowing whatever the state preceptor was about to tell him. He wanted to call for Huacheng, but before he could do so, Huacheng had already come to sit beside him. "MXTX likes a service top. I don't know what to tell you. It's plain as day." "You saw those murals at Mount Tonglu, correct?" the state preceptor asked. "I did," Shilian replied. "Were you the one who made them?" "Yes, that was me," the state preceptor replied. "Every time Mount Tonglu opened, I snuck in to prevent a new ghost king from being born, and to do whatever I could to leave some clues to tell others the story of the kingdom of Wuyang and its crown prince." "Why not just tell people directly?" Shilian asked solemnly. "Why use such a roundabout method?" "Your Highness, why do you think almost no one in the world knows about the kingdom of Wuyang?" the state preceptor asked. Before Shilian could answer, Huacheng drew a conclusion for him. "Everyone who knew has been disposed of, right?" "That's right," the state preceptor replied. "I would be in danger of exposure if the clues left behind were too obvious, or if I spoke of the matter directly. Anyone who learned of it might be utterly destroyed. It wouldn't matter how many lives he had to end. He could level an entire city in 3 days. I'm sure you know that I'm not exaggerating." Of course Shilian knew, and the ironic thing was, in the past he had been thankful that Junwu had ascended to godhood instead of falling to ghosthood, for if he had not, the world would have fallen into chaos. "That is why I can't let him notice that there are still people in the world who know," the state preceptor continued, "but I also can't accept the fact that I'm the only one who really does. I told myself that the truth would eventually be discovered by anyone attentive and brave enough. Since I cannot defy him, I should let fate take its course." I've been on the run for all these years, keeping hidden all the while. He's never been able to capture me, except for that incident 800 years ago when I almost couldn't get away. He managed it this time because he discovered the murals I left behind in the holy temple within Tonglu's Crimson Forest, and because you correctly guessed his identity in the kiln. It occurred to him then that I might still be alive, and that I had left behind many things he didn't want people to know about. When they passed through the holy temple within Tonglu's Crimson Forest, he and Huachang had found that someone had destroyed the last couple of murals, the most important ones. They both suspected that person was hiding inside the temple with them at the time, but they hadn't managed to find the culprit. Now that he thought back on it, there was a very real possibility that White No-Face was hiding in some corner of that temple. Fucking creepy! But Master, why do you have to stay on the run? Shilian asked. The state preceptor replied, Of course it's because betrayal, Huachang said. The word was a little hurtful. The state preceptor shot him a look, but Huachang's expression did not change. You betrayed him, didn't you? Pretty much. That about covers it, the state preceptor turned to Shilian. Your Highness, how shall I put this? Everything in the murals is true. The Crown Prince of Wuyang was like the sun itself to the kingdom of Wuyang. As glorious as you were as the Crown Prince of Shanlei, he was many times more. My 3 peers and I were once his vassals. After the Crown Prince ascended, he appointed the 4 of us to the heavens, and there we beheld many celestial beings of all types of character. Without exaggeration, he was still the sun even in the heavenly realm, shining so brightly in the sea of gods that those beside him lost their color. As the state preceptor spoke, an unintentional flash of a smile curved his lips. When he spoke about His Highness, Shilian could see that he wasn't referring to Junwu or White No-Face, but to that young crown prince from 2,000 years ago. I think you told me a similar story long ago, Shilian said. Did I? Your memory gets bad when you're old. You did, but you didn't tell me he ascended. You told me that he died. That's probably because I'd rather he hadn't ascended, the state preceptor said. Was it because Mount Tonglu erupted? The state preceptor didn't directly answer his question. He only said, His Highness's spiritual powers were too strong. In a dream, he foresaw the future of Wuyang as a sea of fire, and so he started thinking of ways to save his people. If I knew then what I know now, I would have never let him do it, but none of us back then thought things would turn out the way they did. We simply believed that if people were going to die, what could be wrong with saving them? We don't have time to unpack that, but that's a sentence and a half. But things weren't so simple. It was impossible to stop the volcano from erupting, so the only option was to migrate if we wanted 0 casualties. But the affected area was too large. It wasn't just a matter of 1 or 2 cities. Nobles and commoners alike considered invasion the best method to claim new territory. Otherwise, no foreign kingdom would allow such a great number of people from Wuyang to take up residence inside their borders. However, to His Highness, invasion wasn't an option at all. War would result in bloodshed, which would lead to bloodlust. People would turn cruel and lose their humanity. We just sidestepped into White No-Face backstory, and I'm only now really just catching up with that fact. Still, the kingdom of Wuyang dispatched troops. There was complete annihilation wherever the soldiers marched. Since the objective was to make room for future Wuyang migrants, the generals gave the order to massacre the citizens of other kingdoms. The more, the better. Blood flowed like rivers. Corpses were piled high as mountains. When His Highness found out, he was very angry. As you saw, he descended upon the battlefield and punished the soldiers of Wuyang. Shilian was intrigued when he realized that the one who did those things was a young Junwu, and thus also a young White No-Face. But he wasn't the only one who was angry, the state preceptor continued. The whole affair had angered the nobles of Wuyang and some of the common people. Many went to the holy temple to question His Highness. We only wanted to survive. We needed more land, and we had no choice but to invade those other kingdoms. What's wrong with that? The impact of this incident was far bigger than we expected, and it only escalated further and further. Some were already calling for the desecration of his statues and burning of his temples, but His Highness endured all of it. He said that he would die defending the kingdom if Wuyang was the one invaded. He would not allow the enemy to set a single toe across the border. but that we ourselves must never invade others. He earnestly implored everyone to abandon thoughts of war and to wait until he had finished building something. The Heaven Crossing Bridge. I am reminded of a line from Good Omens as they're watching Jesus get put up on the cross, and Crowley asks Aziraphale, what did he say to piss up? I'm paraphrasing. What did he say that got everyone so angry? And Aziraphale goes, be kind to one another. And Crowley goes, yeah, okay, yeah, that'll do it. And it really will. It's really quite fucking remarkable how the fastest way to paint a target on your forehead is to tell people to be kind to one another. In any kind of real, grand content. Yeah. If there was no more land in the mortal realm, then he'd send the people to take refuge in the heavens for a while, the state preceptor said haltingly. Although it was an inconceivable idea. All four of us believed in His Highness absolutely. We were convinced that he could do it. Or rather, we would do our utmost to support him in any endeavor he attempted. Of course, the other heavenly officials didn't feel the same. The entire heavenly realm objected to it, but His Highness endured it all. He took on 3 burdens at once: the ignorance and complaints of the nobles and citizens of Wuyang, the incessant outrage of all the gods in heaven, and the enormous undertaking of the Heaven Crossing Bridge. Huacheng snorted. The heavens objected. I assume it was more than simple disagreements. The state preceptor nodded slowly. If he'd faced mere opposition, it wouldn't have mattered, but Shilian could vaguely guess at what had happened, but he still asked, but? The bridge required an enormous amount of time and a staggering amount of spiritual power to build. His Highness couldn't be distracted at all, the state preceptor said. He essentially stopped going anywhere else, stopped doing anything else, and stopped listening to the prayers of his believers. He could only focus on this one massive undertaking. However, a god who can only do one thing will never be able to keep their followers. The first day he took on the burden of building the bridge, the people were grateful to him and remembered him. The second, third, and fourth days were the same. After a month, 2 months, they were still grateful and remembered him. But as time dragged on, things changed. The volcano hadn't erupted yet, but His Highness didn't do anything but silently conserve his strength. The people couldn't help but feel that he wasn't as powerful as he once was, or even that he wasn't as dedicated. It was inevitable. It was inevitable that they'd begin to worship a new god at a time like that. The kingdom of Wuyang had a high population and abundant wealth, and its citizens were fervently devout. His Highness's impressive strength made that quite obvious. Many heavenly officials had long been salivating over his domain and the believers within it, so Shilian understood. So, the other heavenly officials took advantage of this opportunity. The people of Wuyang resented their crown prince after he descended and forced the troops to withdraw, and the heavenly officials used that to tempt them. In doing so, they divided his believers and weakened the source of his spiritual power. Right? It's not that His Highness didn't know what they were doing. He just didn't know what to do about it, the state preceptor said. Shilian inclined his head slightly. He's a god, so of course he couldn't tell his devotees, I won't allow you to worship a god other than me. He would have scoffed at such a demand, too. Naturally, you understand him very well, the state preceptor said. But it just had to happen when he couldn't afford to lose devotees or spiritual power, lest it affect the construction of the Heaven Crossing Bridge, Shilian added. That's precisely it, the state preceptor said. It was up to the 4 of us to speak to the people and let them know what was at stake. And how did that go? Shilian asked. It probably went nowhere, Huacheng said. Nowhere indeed, the state preceptor replied. At least, it didn't go nearly as well as hoped. Some people returned as devotees, worried that the construction of the bridge might fail. But a larger number thought that His Highness was being domineering. Their prayers were not being answered, so of course they began to worship other gods who would listen to their needs. They were free devotees. They could believe in whatever they wanted to believe. It was more than natural. It wasn't that he didn't want to please everyone. It's just that Shilian sighed and whispered, He had the heart, but not the strength. Ow. Also, yeah, all of the elements of this are feeling very familiar. And not just like, it's like Sheila-Ann's backstory. Not just that. It just feels very familiar. In that we have been introduced to concepts similar to this the whole time. I'm about to go fucking crazy. Where on earth? The state preceptor continued his tale. After His Highness learned of this, he told us to stop our efforts, that if they wanted to go, we should let them. They wouldn't be wholeheartedly devoted to him if they were kept by force. That was true, and even though we warned them over and over again, his devotees' hearts had already wandered. If they forced themselves to return, it would only be to placate us. Their belief would no longer be sincere, so its power wouldn't be as strong. He couldn't be angry at the devotees, and he refused to request the help of other heavenly officials, Sheila-Ann commented. Even if he did ask, the other heavenly officials would never have helped him, the state preceptor said. If they had been willing to lend a hand, they wouldn't have been against it in the first place, and they wouldn't have tried to lure away his devotees. His Highness became more and more silent and closed off as he used his own powers to build and support the bridge. I watched him every day. Although he said nothing, I could tell just how much he was suffering inside, suffering that he had to bear alone. No matter how much the four of us wanted to help, we couldn't lighten his burden. Finally, after enduring all of this for 3 arduous years, it was time. The volcano was about to erupt. The moment the news broke, the people fought to swarm the bridge. As the four of us directed the frantic crowd, we worried about His Highness as he was supporting the bridge all alone. The state preceptor sighed. Before that, we never would have worried that there was something he couldn't achieve, but at that time we did. While the bridge was quite stable at first, it needed to be supported for longer and longer as the crowd grew larger and larger. His Highness's hands started to shake, and his face grew paler and paler. No one else could see him, only we could. I sensed things weren't right and told the people, please wait a moment, give him a little bit of time. Don't swarm toward him all at once, just let him catch his breath. He will definitely save all of you. But the volcano was about to erupt, and lives were in danger. No one was willing to wait. They all rushed onto the bridge like mad. Some were even trampled to death in the stampede. We couldn't hold them back. That's the key to, not all of humanity's ugliness, because it has a couple of different roots, right? But man, one of the biggest keys to human ugliness is desperation. You make a human desperate, and all bets are off. In the end, what we had feared most came to pass. Because we kept losing devotees over those 3 years, His Highness's spiritual powers were no longer as strong as they once were. Hundreds of thousands of people swarmed onto the bridge at once, celebrating their salvation. But as they approached the heavenly realm, the bridge collapsed under their weight. Sheila-Ann's breath hitched. The state preceptor continued to speak. The heavenly arch was shattered, and a crowd of millions dropped from the sky in an instant, wailing and screaming as they plunged into a sea of fire and burned to ash right before His Highness's eyes. I was completely stunned at the time and didn't dare look at His Highness's face. The bridge couldn't be repaired, the people couldn't be rescued, and the fire couldn't be extinguished. There was no way to help at all. And there were many more who hadn't yet made it onto the bridge, left behind to be entombed in lava and sealed by flying ash, screeching, wailing, cursing. That scene was truly too horrible. I have never witnessed anything more horrifying since. Shilian tried to imagine the chilling display. The state preceptor continued his tale. The bridge collapsed, and the people of Wuyang went mad. They burned down His Highness's temples, toppled his divine statues, used blades to stab his heart, until it was mush. They cursed him as a useless creature, a shit excuse for a god. He was a god, and gods should be mighty and strong. Gods couldn't fail, but he had, and so he could no longer remain on high. The officials in the heavenly realm had long been waiting for this moment. They said, "We told you it was impossible. You've caused a serious mess. We have no choice but to ask you to return to the realm below." And His Highness asked a very foolish question. "Why didn't any of you help me?" But why would anyone help him for no reason? And if they'd allowed him to triumph over this enormous tribulation for the kingdom of Wuyang, wouldn't that mean he would never again have a match in the heavenly realm? With just this essay of just like 100 words, maybe 200 words, she spoke fucking volumes. You could extract essays. That's why it had been a very foolish question. I imagine he knew this, yet he still asked. No one answered him, of course, and His Highness was banished. He fell back to the mortal realm, no longer a god and no longer a crown prince. We followed him and assured him that he would certainly ascend again, and he began cultivating anew, but it was much too difficult. I'm sure you understand. Of course Shilian understood. Yeah. The higher one stood, the harder one fell. After falling from the heavens to the mortal realm, only endless cold and malice awaited him. The volcano was still erupting, and the kingdom of Wuyang had fallen into a crisis worse than it had ever seen in all its history. The state preceptor continued. Refugees, rebellions, and invasions were incessant, and the people were at the end of their wits. Their attitude toward His Highness had deteriorated. It was entirely opposite from what it had been before. Even so, His Highness still wanted to help them. However, something else happened around that time. Many other heavenly officials began to show their grace. Even though they hadn't been willing to help save everyone from the volcano's eruption, they were quite happy to grant little blessings, deliver a bit of medicine or food or other such things. Since His Highness was banished, his capacity to help was, of course, far smaller than those heavenly officials. It was as if the people of Wuyang had seized a lifeline or seen their parents born anew. He lost devotees even faster, though honestly, there weren't many left anyway. All the praise and adoration once reserved for His Highness alone was given to other heavenly officials, and only hate and rejection remained for him. The state preceptor closed his eyes. At the time, we had a hard time coming to terms with it. We were upset with the unfairness of it all. Those other heavenly officials hadn't helped the people all that much, and they only appeared after the disaster was over. His Highness was the one who did the most. He gave it his all, and he should have been successful too. He just fell one step short. Why was he the one doomed eternally? Why was the one who had given the most ignored, while all the praise and gratitude was lavished on the ones who'd given nothing but their trifles? I don't know, man. I think MXTX had a couple of things to say about, I don't know, politics and world leadership. She may have had one or two things that she wanted to illustrate. That's just a working theory. Whew. That was also when my way of thinking began to change. I couldn't help but think about what might have happened if His Highness had pretended that he'd never seen the future in his dreams. If he had chosen from the start to sit back and observe on the grounds that the gods could do nothing to change the course of fate and granted blessings after the volcano erupted, like the other heavenly officials, surely the people would have cried those tears of too many thoughts. Surely the people would have cried those tears of gratitude for him instead. Did that thought only cross your mind at that point? Hua Chang interrupted, voice flat. You should have known from the beginning. If you slice off a piece of flesh to save one person, that one person will be grateful. But the more you slice, the more that person will demand of you. Even if you cut yourself down to nothing but bones, they will still not be satisfied. Hua Chang just said a lot. He just said a lot. And what's weird is that reminds me of a character that I created in one of the Dungeons and Dragons campaigns that I run. That's like, literally it was that in a character. He helped people and they kept demanding. And when he finally drew a line, they were like, what? And then it turned into like a deeply abusive situation and they kept him like as prisoner for like 30 years. Yeah. Whew, okay. I didn't dare tell him any of these thoughts, the state preceptor said. His Highness grew more and more somber. I couldn't tell what he was thinking, had no idea if his feelings were the same as my own. Days passed and the eruption continued. The entire kingdom of Wuyang was mired in terror, unable to escape. No one knew how to make it stop, how to end this nightmare. But one day His Highness told us that he had found a way to calm the volcano. When he told us how, we had a huge fight. Let me guess, Hua Chang said. The how was human sacrifice. I think this is where the bridge to human face disease starts. I don't know what you think. Correct, the state preceptor replied. His Highness said that we could use a group of wicked degenerates as a sacrifice. We could throw them into the kiln to pacify its furious flames. The four of us each had different opinions about this, but the consensus was opposition. We could never do anything of the sort. In the beginning, His Highness didn't want Wuyang to invade other kingdoms precisely because he didn't want to use a life to save a life. How would sacrificing lives to the kiln be any different? It'd be even worse, in fact. The ones who were most opposed to the idea began to quarrel directly with His Highness. The argument was so severe that fists were thrown. I was against it too at first, but it was harder for me to bear internal discord in the same way I did the constant attacks from the outside. You must understand, the four of us had always supported His Highness, but by that point we were his only support. And yet, in the heat of the moment, blows were exchanged, and one of us even accused His Highness of no longer being the Highness of the past, that he'd changed, that he'd forgotten his heart. Those words truly executed his heart. I couldn't stand it. If even we opposed and berated His Highness, then there was no one left in the world who stood by his side. I didn't object to his idea in the end. I only told him to let it go and stop worrying about such affairs. The heavenly realm, the mortal realm, all the refugees. Stop caring about all of it. It was just too tiresome. However, no one listened to me. After that huge fight, the other three left. Shilian shook his head, not knowing what to say. He knew too well that leaving at a time like that was like adding frost to snow. Only I stayed behind, the state preceptor said. His Highness didn't say much when I did. He simply asked me, "Are you leaving?" The former Highness's expression when he asked me that question, at that moment I genuinely thought I'd understand even if he did sacrifice people to the kiln. I said, "Your Highness, I won't leave." His Highness still didn't say much, but he seemed to change his mind and never mentioned human sacrifices again. He set up a ritual site near the kiln, and I accompanied him there every time, both of us enduring the curses and thrown rocks of the refugees as we conducted services to try to suppress the volcano's fury. I thought that would be the end of the story, but one day I discovered something that chilled me to the bone. The state preceptor's expression turned terrifying, as if he was once again seeing the same image that chilled him all those years ago. Shilian's heart felt like it was being squeezed tight by an invisible hand. What was it? He suddenly started covering his face, the state preceptor said. His Highness was handsome, and he'd never hidden his face before, the state preceptor said. And there wasn't anything that could have injured him. It was the first time I'd ever seen him like that in all our years together, so I was perplexed. I asked him, Your Highness, what happened to your face? He said he was accidentally burned. I didn't know when he could have suffered such an injury, and he wouldn't let me examine his wounds. He would only apply herbs on his own. After that, his whereabouts became unpredictable. That was unusual, but a wonderful thing happened that temporarily distracted me. The volcano began to calm. The kiln gradually settled into stillness and did not show any further activity for a long time. Since His Highness had been the only one devoting himself to the matter, many people of Wuyang thought that he was the one who had suppressed the volcano, and some began to worship him anew. His Highness's path of cultivation also started progressing more smoothly. At least there weren't any more people jeering him or throwing rocks. They even gradually started smiling at him again. I still thought something wasn't right. There were many things that weren't right. While my three friends all had different personalities, I knew they wouldn't just leave and ignore everything going forward. Even if they were angry with His Highness, they wouldn't be angry with me too. At the very least, they wouldn't have cut me off entirely. What was most unusual was His Highness's face. He kept hiding it, at first wearing rags and cloaks, then later a mask that he wouldn't remove for any reason. I even began to wonder whether this person was really His Highness. Sometimes I suspected an imposter, that it wasn't him at all. Everything about him had completely changed. The way he spoke, his behavior, his personality. Sometimes he was kind and dear, sometimes he'd abruptly fly into a rage. There was an incident where he smashed all the mirrors in his room while he was alone. Everything was covered in blood. I didn't know where he had been hurt so terribly or what manner of wound could have possibly bled so much. But even more horrifying were the strange voices I'd often hear. If this prince didn't throw those 3 advisors into the fucking kiln, and that is how we got motherfucking human face disease. Voices? Shilian asked. Deep in the night, I could sometimes hear human voices coming from His Highness's room. It sounded like a few people whispering and arguing, but it was always just him in there when I'd go in to check. His Highness stopped allowing me inside after it happened a few times. One night, I heard those strange voices again, but this time I noticed that they sounded like my 3 missing friends. I thought that they might have returned in secret, but why would they hide from me? I couldn't sit still anymore, so I got out of bed and ran into His Highness's room. Strangely, there really was no one there besides His Highness, who was lying on the bed, still wearing his mask. I stood there and listened for a moment, and I heard the voices again. They seemed to be coming from His Highness. Or, more accurately, they were coming from under his mask. I crept to His Highness's bedside. The closer I got, the more certain I was that the voices really were coming from beneath the mask. Was His Highness talking in his sleep? Could he have missed his friends so much that he learned to mimic their voices in his dreams? I hesitated for a long time, and while I waited there, His Highness did not move. I assumed he was asleep, so I gently removed his mask, and I saw what was beneath. Unconcealable terror flowed from the state preceptor's eyes. My 3 friends. They had been the ones talking, not His Highness. His Highness's face was mangled, covered in jagged gashes that had been inflicted by something sharp, his flesh mangled and smeared with half-dried blood. And there were 3 more faces growing on his own, mouths moving, opening and closing. They were their faces. Shilian shuddered. He threw the 3 vassals who left him into the kiln. The state preceptor didn't answer. He was completely submerged in the enduring terror the scene still evoked in his heart. Those faces hadn't seen light in a long time, he said. Even the moonlight was painful to them. When I removed the mask, they seemed shocked. They squinted and stopped talking. But after a moment, when they saw it was me, they began to call my name. Ooh, God, no. I was completely stunned. Earlier, I said that I'd never seen anything more horrific than millions of people plummeting from the skies and burning alive in a scene of fire, but the scene before my eyes at that moment was 1,000,000 times worse. My hand shook non-stop as it held the mask. I probably would have dropped it on the floor and woken His Highness if I hadn't been petrified from head to toe, frozen in place. Meanwhile, those 3 faces seemed anxious to tell me something. The movement of their mouths grew even more erratic, but they still suppressed their voices, like they were afraid to wake His Highness. I was disgusted and terrified when I saw them, but I couldn't help but be curious what they wanted to tell me. So I held my breath, bent down, and leaned close to His Highness's face to listen. Coming so close I could smell the thick stench of blood and rot that the medicinal herbs couldn't conceal. I heard them say, "Quickly, run away! His Highness has gone mad!" As it turned out, the other 3 had still been worried even after they left, so they returned in secret to speak to His Highness. But when they found him, he was herding a crowd of people toward the volcano's peak. That was when they found out that His Highness had never abandoned the idea of living sacrifices. Seized by shock and rage, they attempted to stop him and began to fight with him, yet unexpectedly he savagely killed them and threw them into the kiln along with the rest. The ordinary citizens were, of course, burnt to dust and ash as soon as they were thrown in, but the 3 of them were cultivators, and they had been murdered by His Highness. Their resentment and attachment to the world was deeply profound. Their souls took his body as their host and grew as lesions on his body, venting their rage and berating him constantly in the hope of stopping him from pursuing his terrible endeavors. My horror and confusion mounted as I listened, and I didn't know what to do. I truly couldn't tell what was more terrifying, His Highness or those 3 abominations on his face. Right then, I felt a hand rest on my head. I stiffened. With great apprehension, I looked up and saw His Highness. I don't know when he woke up. He and the 3 faces on his face, a total of 4 sets of eyes, were all staring at me. The expressions of those human faces became even more exaggerated, and as they twisted, they tore at the gashes on his face, causing fresh rivulets of blood to pour down. He stared at me for a long, long time. And then he sighed and asked, "Didn't I tell you not to come in here?" All at once I understood his recent abnormal behavior. When he discovered those 3 creatures growing upon him, His Highness hadn't been able to accept it. He couldn't tolerate his inhuman, demonic reflection in the mirror, so he smashed all of them. The blood was from his attempts to slice them off with blades. The stench of rot was from his wounds, which would not heal. But no matter how many times he gouged them from his flesh, they always grew back. The state preceptor covered half of his face, his pupils shrinking violently. I fell to my knees at his bedside. His Highness slowly sat up on the bed and said, "Don't be afraid. This happened to them because they betrayed me. As long as you don't do the same, I will treat you as I always have. As long as you are my loyal servant, nothing will change." But how could I not be afraid? And how could nothing change? Everything already had. His Highness is very smart. He never needed to change his behavior based on people's expressions before his banishment, but he had learned to observe them and do so since. He guessed what I was thinking and asked me slowly, "Are you leaving too, then?" Oh, Lord, we have art. Okay. To be honest, I didn't know. If he had only sacrificed those degenerates he once spoke of, perhaps I could have pretended nothing had happened. I did say that I would have understood. But he had killed our best friends and thrown them into the kiln with his own hands. Now we only had each other. This really was madness. I couldn't accept it. And then His Highness murmured to himself, "It's all right. I expected that. No one would stay now that I've become something like this. I can manage on my own. I understand now. I've always been alone. I don't need anyone." His expression turned savage, and he seized me by the neck with one hand and began to strangle me. He stared at me unblinkingly as he mumbled to himself over and over, "I can manage on my own. All alone, 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 alone. I don't need anyone. I don't need anyone. I don't need anyone." His Highness has incredible strength. If he had really wanted to kill me, my neck would have snapped in an instant before I could even make a sound, but I didn't die immediately. The moment he started to act out, my 3 friends began to scream on his face. They'd done something to him, and the pain in his head made him start screaming as well. I was also screaming. The 5 of us were all screaming wildly, yelling like madmen, like we had all gone crazy. His Highness gripped his head with one hand as the other strangled me harder. My vision was growing dark. I couldn't hold on much longer, but then I saw something beneath his pillow. It was a sword. He always hid it there when he slept. It was a habit he had developed during banishment. I caught hold of the hilt and yanked it out. The blade shimmered with chilling light. His Highness burst out laughing, his eyes blood red as he asked me, "Are you going to kill me too? Come, stab me, quick. Stab me right in the heart. You can add to the count. We can see who'll be the last left standing. You lot, or me." Some art for this lovely moment in time. Hang on. Isn't that just beautiful? Yeah? Isn't that wonderful? What a great moment. I'm glad they captured that in a visual medium. Thank you. Thank you for that. Uh-huh. Of course, I didn't stab him. I only flashed the blade in front of him and cried with everything I had, Your Highness, please come back. Look at yourself. Look at what you've become." He had smashed all the mirrors, and it had been a long time since he'd seen his own reflection. The blade was sharp and bright. It reflected his appearance, and he saw his own face. Did we not just do this? Was that not literally how he was revealed to Sheila? Somebody said, I don't know who, but somebody just made a comment about, water drop. Somebody just made a comment that said, I both love and fear MXTX. Right now, it's mostly fear. I think kind of right now and for forevermore, it's mostly fear. I'm afraid of this bitch, okay? I hate her and I'm terrified of her. She's terrifying. And we have a whole last volume and a half to go. She's scary as shit. He was stunned by the sight of himself. The grip of His Highness's hand around my neck did not slacken, but he stared and stared. After staring for who knows how long, a line of tears suddenly streamed from one eye. When I saw his tears, I couldn't help but cry as well. That reflection on the blade, such ugliness. Just a glance had disgusted me, so why did I force him to look? Why did I remind him that he was such an ugly creature now? I couldn't bear it, and the sword fell from my hand and clattered to the floor. In the end, His Highness heaved me away and said, "Get lost." And I did, crawling and stumbling as I fled. Having listened to that whole story in one go, the held breath in Shilian's throat finally released. The state preceptor also lowered his hands. I ran as far as I could and escaped to the kingdom of Wuyang. And it wasn't long before the volcano erupted once again. This time the entire kingdom was completely buried, and almost no one survived. An entire country gone, just like that. Even after sacrificing people? There are literally no easy answers to any of this, by the way. It inspires essays upon essays upon discussions. We can talk till we are blue in the face, but there are ultimately, and this is the point, no easy answers to any of these situations that any of these people have been put in. There just aren't. Where the heck? There we go. I escaped the calamity, but I never heard any news of His Highness again. It was as if he'd been buried along with the kingdom of Wuyang. I've traveled to the heavens, and I've also cultivated on my own, so I have some achievements to my name. I maintained the state of my body and drifted aimlessly through the mortal realm. I had served His Highness since we were both young, and I didn't know what to do now that I couldn't any longer. His Highness was gone, and my 3 friends were dead. I created 3 empty-shelled fakes and made them speak in my friends' voices to keep me company. And to play cards sometimes! She just slid that right at... We're not talking about it. I'm not talking about that one. That was... Hearing empty-shelled fakes, Shilian's expression grew solemn. My magic improved over the years, so I later instilled the skills of my 3 friends into the fakes, the state preceptor continued. Were they the other 3 state preceptors? Shilian asked softly. No wonder he had always found those 3 so strange. They never acted on their own and never socialized with him one-on-one. Apparently they had been little more than puppets, and would be exposed as such if they left the chief state preceptor's side. The very same. I suppose you are also my friend's disciple, the state preceptor replied. Alas, my creations were a pale reflection of the real thing. I could only instill the barest portion of their true strength into the fakes, so they couldn't teach you much. And he has long since destroyed the 3 fakes that kept me company for so long. The heavenly dynasty changed after another century or 2, and all the heavenly officials of the past faded away. Gradually, a new batch of heavenly officials replaced them. However, none of that was any of my business. I was just living, shamelessly cheating death. Until one day in some kingdom, a crown prince was born under the ominous star. That was you, the crown prince of the kingdom of Shenlei. Shit, so the whole split soul thing was just like an incorrect idea? Maybe not. It depends on exactly how the splitting thing works. I should probably shut up and keep reading. Here it was at last. Shilian's hands resting on his thighs, clenched slightly. The state preceptor sat cross-legged and hugged his arms as he spoke. I thought it was quite the coincidence, maybe even fate, but in truth, it wasn't really all that remarkable. Many, many years had passed since Wuyang's destruction, so of course there would be 1 or 2 more examples over the passage of centuries. But even so, driven by a feeling I didn't understand, I made up a random new name and became the state preceptor of Shenlei. I knew that name was made up, Shilian thought. No offense to your Shenlei, the state preceptor said, but muddling my way into the state preceptor position was much too easy for me. There was only one problem. People always assume a man without a beard is incapable, that those who look young are inexperienced and incompetent and should be disregarded. I knew I might not pass if I went to the interview with my current face, so I changed my appearance to add 10 or 20 years, and sure enough, I quickly got the position. But being state preceptor meant I had to speak directly to the officials of the heavenly realm, and thus I came face to face with Junwoo. Although he looked very different from the highness I remembered, I knew him too well. I had my suspicions after only exchanging words a few times, but they were still only suspicions, and even if I suspected him, I didn't want him to know that. He had become someone else completely, and the lesions on his face had also vanished. I thought that must mean that my three friends' resentment had dispersed, and if that was the case, there was no need to bring up ancient history and disrupt this peace. So wasn't it fine if we both pretended not to recognize each other? I would have likely done the same had I been in your position, Shilian said. But we couldn't pretend forever, the state preceptor said. Because we both saw you. Your Highness, by now you must have guessed why I had such high hopes for you. You're very much like him. I hoped you would become the god he once wanted to be, and do what he couldn't. You could use your perfection to remedy our regrets. Hua Cheng, however, said flatly, You were wrong from the start. They're not alike at all. The state preceptor gave him a look. Of course you'd say that they aren't similar now, but they were very much alike back then. The problem was, they were too much alike. He turned to Shilian again. I wasn't too pleased when you saved the small child who fell from the city wall during the god-pleasing ceremony. It wasn't just because the incident stopped the ceremony, it was also because it was too conspicuous. You had caught Junwoo's attention. Junwoo started talking to me about you. He was very interested in you, and every time we spoke about you, I could tell that something wasn't quite right. But I could also tell that he genuinely liked you. It was the delight of finding a suitable good sprout. He always wanted to appoint you to the heavens to serve as an official in his palace, but every time he brought it up, I used all sorts of reasons to urge him not to do so. Shilian didn't want to believe that Junwoo's affection toward him had been fake, but when he heard the state preceptor confirm that it was sincere, the feelings it brought up were complicated. It was difficult to describe. The turning point was Yinian Bridge, the state preceptor said. At that, Shilian snapped back to attention. Do you still remember the ghost at the bridge? The state preceptor asked. That was the catalyst of my ascension. Of course I remember, Shilian replied quietly. When you ran into that ghost, I already sensed that something was wrong, the state preceptor said. It was haunting a broken bridge in the barren wild, clad in armor that had been shattered and torn by countless weapons that pierced its perpetually blood-soaked body. Its feet burned with the flames of hell, and it left fiery, bloody footprints in its wake. Furthermore, those 3 questions it asked you. All of that made me very concerned, worried even, though I couldn't put my finger on what was wrong. And because you ascended so quickly after defeating the ghost at the bridge, I didn't have a chance to figure it out. Thankfully, Junwoo's attitude toward you was as good as always after you ascended. He granted you favors and thought very highly of you, like nothing had changed, so I told myself not to overthink things. After that came the great drought of Shanlei, the rebellion of Yong'an, and the appearance of that creature, White No-Face. Shilian held his breath and hung on to every word. I said as much before, but I initially had no idea what the creature truly was, the state preceptor explained. Even as human face disease broke out, I only had suspicions. Parasitic vengeful spirits aren't anything new, they've just never been so widespread. I was also feeling resentful of the law of heaven at that point, so I thought White No-Face had been born of nature as heaven's punishment for you. But in light of many, many other things, as you encountered that creature again and again, and the epidemic spiraled more and more out of control, I was forced to consider the worst-case scenario. Many, many other things? Shilian asked. Like what? What do you mean? The family of 3 who died at the gates of the royal capital of Shanlei, the state preceptor replied. Shilian stopped breathing. I examined their corpses afterward, the state preceptor said. I discovered they weren't human at all. They were empty-shelled fakes. But empty-shelled fakes are hollow, Julian exclaimed. They don't have organs and can't bleed. There was no need for organs, the state preceptor said. A person's innards would be damaged by falling from such a height, so stuffing some mushed flesh into their bellies and pouring in some blood-like fluid would suffice. One of my 3 friends had been an expert in fashioning such unusual crafts. He was the original designer of the technique for creating empty-shelled fakes and taught it only to us. The method to make such things wasn't as widely known back then, and since my friends were dead, who was the only person other than me capable of making such realistic fakes? Shilian hung his head. His pupils had shrunk to pinpricks. The family of 3 who died before the gates of the royal capital of Shanlei was a direct catalyst of the war, yet those lives hadn't been real at all. They were nothing but an elaborate trick. Then, why didn't you tell me at the time? Shilian asked. I didn't dare to, the state preceptor said. Considering your personality back then, wouldn't you have charged right up there for vengeance if I told you the truth of the matter? That wouldn't have saved you or Shenlei. It would have only hastened your annihilation. Besides, even without those 3 empty shells, sooner or later there would have been some other incident that sparked war, like that missing dog in the capital. Later, you were defeated, as was Shenlei. I could hold myself back no longer. I first sent everyone at the Royal Holy Temple away, then I requested his grace inside the Palace of Divine Might. I unmasked him then and there. This was the meeting that Junwoo had mentioned before, their encounter 800 years ago. I had many questions for him, but he wouldn't confirm or deny anything, the state preceptor said. Finally, I asked him, Your Highness, what exactly do you want? And he finally answered me. He said that he wanted you to become his perfect heir. If anyone in the world could understand him completely, it was you. Once he succeeded, you would never betray him. I understood what he was planning. We started fighting with our fists in the heat of the argument. I have no fighting skill whatsoever. I would die without a doubt in a physical altercation, and he could crush me without lifting a finger. But suddenly his expression changed drastically, and he covered his face. I was quite shocked, and only then did I notice that the 3 lesions had surfaced again. As it turned out, they hadn't vanished at all. He had been suppressing them with his spiritual power. But they had managed to emerge somehow. Perhaps it was because his emotions were running high, or because of me. Just like that, my 3 friends had returned to stir up a riot. His expression was terrifying, as an agonizing headache shot through him. I once again used that chance to run away. I started drifting in the mortal realm once more, but this time I had to stay under cover. I began to wonder what had become of the former kingdom of Wuyang. I returned to the area to take a look, but I had never expected to happen upon another great discovery. For some reason, the land where the former kingdom of Wuyang once stood was sealed off completely, isolated from the outside world, and after wandering for a long time in the sealed domain, I ran into my 3 friends again. What are you Were they the 3 mountain spirits? Old age, sickness, and death? Shilian asked. Correct, the state preceptor replied. The kiln devoured their bodies, and the dust of their incinerated bones mixed with the volcanic ash, which was then blown out with subsequent eruptions. The residue built up over time, layer upon layer. Now that a millennium had passed, it had formed 3 large mountains, each containing a part of their souls. It took me a long time to find a way to communicate with my friends who were now mountain spirits, but once I succeeded, I learned many things. For example, the heavenly officials of the previous dynasty hadn't faded away naturally. Oh, God damn it. So overwhelmed was I, but I really wish that I had actually fucking said it, because I thought it that the second they said, oh, the old regimen faded away naturally. I, in my brain, was like, bullshit, but we were in the middle of a lot of things at the moment. I wish I had said it, though, because now I just have to ask you to believe me, but I totally thought this. He had hunted them down and killed them all one by one, like God of War 3. He massacred the entire heavenly court, leaving no one behind. After washing the heavenly realm with blood, he returned to the mortal realm once again and patiently waited for an opportune time. He changed his name, forged a new identity, became a mortal, and then ascended. All of the old heavenly officials were dead, so no one knew who he was or what he looked like before. The backstory of the heavenly emperor that is known in the mortal realm, his background, his parables, his anecdotes, his appearance, his character, it's all fake. It's all an intricate lie he fabricated. This heavenly capital is a new heavenly realm he created single-handedly, and it is under his absolute control. He mixed the ashes of the previous dynasty's heavenly officials into the foundation of the city so he could trample and step on them every single day. There might be someone beneath your feet right now. That's some old boy shit. If you've never seen Old Boy, classic South Korean film from about 2004. For film buffs, it is absolutely required viewing for a reason. Go watch it. Don't look up anything about it. Old Boy. Currently, he is the most exalted martial god of the heavenly realm, the state preceptor continued. He looks glorious and scintillating on the surface, but an infinite darkness is suppressed deep within his heart. Resentment, pain, anger, hatred, he must release those poisonous emotions to maintain his internal balance, lest he go berserk and slaughter everyone around him. That is the only way he is able to uphold his position as the ruler of all three realms. The former kingdom of Wuyang had become hell, and the kiln had been glutted with countless living souls and the souls of three former heavenly officials. It now recognized him as its master. He regularly releases his dark emotions into the kiln, using the millions of Wuyang souls within as kindling to stoke the flames of hell and forge many malicious things. The method to forge those malicious things is different from the process of creating a supreme, right? Shilian said that was going to be my next question. Thank you, MXTX, for reading my mind. Indeed, the state preceptor replied. Supremes came later, since he changed the refining method. What do you mean by that? Shilian asked. The quality and quantity, the state preceptor said. He gave Huachang another look. Both of you must already know that a supreme is only born once a century, once every several centuries even. Only one, every time. They are extremely rare and immensely difficult to create. That being said, a supreme's past life is an independent existence. The kiln only provides an environment to expedite the process of their explosive birth. Those with the potential to be a supreme could become one anywhere. It would certainly happen sooner or later. In fact, the word supreme was originally derived from the words unrivaled and pinnacle. There's a footnote about this. Supreme, derived from unrivaled and pinnacle. Oh yeah, in Chinese writing. I don't think symbols are actually the right word, but the symbols for unrivaled and pinnacle do indeed combine supreme. It didn't have any connection to whether one had trained inside the kiln. Still, enduring the kiln's refining process would certainly make one into such an entity, since there aren't many capable of such a feat. Haven't there only been 3 up until now? That was another thing I noticed. That there were 3. Shilian stole a glance at Hua Cheng by his side, the man happening to be gazing back at him. Although he didn't know why Shilian had looked at him, he smiled. However, the kiln's previous creations weren't like that, the state preceptor continued. In the early days, he'd have a session every few years, and each time the results would be different. Endless batches of dark beings poured from its depths. Perhaps that had something to do with his unstable emotions. It produced nothing but monsters forged from his hatred and resentment. There are probably a few familiar names among them. For example, the Reverend of Empty Words. The Reverend of Empty Words was born of the kiln? Shilian exclaimed. Correct, the state preceptor replied. Those creatures, some have their own consciousness and break away from him. Some don't, and it can be considered his clones. The Reverend of Empty Words had its own consciousness, and it even divided itself into many smaller clones after it left. My 3 friends guarded the borders of the kingdom of Wuyang to prevent the creatures from leaving the domain, while I spent my years in the outside world searching for any that escaped, and trying to fix the problems they caused. Bumped the mic. Shilian recalled the state preceptor's strange change of attitude when he saw Shi Qingxuan. Master, Lord Windmaster, the skilled fortune-telling master who told Shi Qingxuan's fortune back then, the one who told his family not to host feasts. Was that you? Duh, the state preceptor said. What other fortune-telling master could be so skilled and accurate, or so idle that a bowl of kanji could pay for a session? Initially, the Reverend of Empty Words had wanted to devour the young Shiwudu, the state preceptor said, but Shiwudu, that little bastard, was too vicious, too difficult to deal with, even at such a young age. Nothing could get to him, and he had no fear. His fate was so tyrannical that it couldn't be swallowed. If the creature had tried to take a bite, it would only shatter its teeth into a bloody mess, and so it could only turn to his ordinary little brother with a fate of wealth. Although it didn't manage to sink its fangs into either of them in the end, it also didn't suffer any losses. After all, it caused so much grief to the 2 siblings that they couldn't live in peace, and it eventually bit someone whose fate was originally godhood. It really bothers me that I didn't manage to kill that thing in the end. It's already been killed dead, Hua Cheng said. Devoured by Hushuan, right? The state preceptor said. I heard. I was going to watch over the Shi siblings until everything blew over, but the kiln was about to open its gates once more. I couldn't follow them for long before I had to leave, and things were already a mess when I got back. Shiwudu had turned to wickedness and was causing such chaos. It was completely out of hand. It gave me such a headache that even if I wanted to care, I couldn't at that point. It really did spiral into something that couldn't be fixed, even if he'd had the mind to help. The state preceptor added, Truth be told, the Reverend of Empty Words wasn't even a particularly powerful specimen among the kiln's monsters. It just liked to roam around and stir up trouble. It can't even be ranked on the same scale as the rest. It was a low-grade product through and through, but there were others, such as the ghost at Yinyan Bridge, the soul who died in battle, Shilian said quietly. The state preceptor sucked in a breath. Right. Otherwise, why do you think I'd say everything started because of your phrase? The bridge ghost was a dark clone he'd forged in the kiln and had to go on the hunt and kill every few years to vent its hatred. But you just had to defeat it. He could sense that someone had killed the ghost at the bridge, so he descended immediately to see who had managed it. And he saw you. And you just had to say that phrase to his face. Body in the abyss. Heart in paradise. That was an insane mockery of him, a grave provocation that stabbed him straight in the heart. That was the turning point of everything. That was the end of the chapter. We are on page 231 for chapter 119, which is called The White Emperor Sets Deadly Tests in Secret. So I don't think this expository reveal is done, and yet it's still going to rank among one of the greatest reveals I've ever read, seen, or heard. Metal Gear Solid should take notes, actually. That's a video game series that is extremely long-winded. It's really good, but it's extremely long-winded. And it's called long-winded instead of how here, I would not call this long-winded. This is thorough. Two very different things in terms of its exposition. This is thorough. Metal Gear Solid is long-winded. One of the things that Metal Gear Solid has a problem with is kind of like repetition. They think that you're not going to understand, so they kind of repeat a few things, but in vastly different ways. So it ironically becomes even more confusing. But also they just spend they over-explain, right? That's another one of their key problems. And that's why it takes so fucking long. This, while it takes a minute, certainly, that took many pages, and that was indeed long, thorough, and drawn out, it was not unnecessary. And they did not over-explain. They explained just enough. That's freakish. She's terrifying. I need to go lie down because that was so much, and it's not even over yet. So that's exactly what I'm going to do, because I have to stream Merlin later on for patrons. And I'm not going to have a brain cell if I just try to leap from one to the other. So, I'm going to go. Thank you so much for tagging along on what turned out to be, eye-opening, revelatory. These things don't really... I'll think of a word. I'll think of a word that does justice to the... exposition and unearthing of all the... I'll think of a word. I'll think of it. We come back here next Monday to keep going. How many pages do we even have left? I don't know how many pages we read. I'm not entirely sure how many pages we have left, but I still think it's going to take us both Monday and Wednesday to get to the end. It's 230 out of... Oh, actually. Oh, no, yeah. We're at page 230, and there's 336 pages left. So, yeah, we are actually in a perfect place to finish next week. That is what we will be doing come hell or high water. So I will see you guys on Monday for more of this fucking madness. I'm terrified of MXTX. I'm so thoroughly terrified of MXTX. But we're going to finish. And we're going to do that next week. So I will see you then. I hope you had a wonderful time. I hope you have a great rest of your day, week, night, month, whatever. I love you very much. Please take care of yourselves. Okay. I'll see you next week.